She posted, "Know your worth, crown, never settle for less after breaking up with me publicly online." I agreed silently. Months later, she realized my absence was worth more than anything she replaced me with. "You were always too quiet, too soft, too comfortable. I need someone who matches my energy." That was the last thing she said to me. Not in private, not over a phone call, not even in a text message at 2 in the morning, where at least there's some dignity in the darkness. She said it in a comment section, publicly, under a post she had already made about herself. On Instagram, with 342 people watching in real time, reacting with fire emojis and crown emojis, and little "yes queen" replies stacking up underneath like applause at a show I didn't know I was performing in. I read it on my lunch break, sitting in my car, with a half-eaten sandwich in my hand, and the radio playing something forgettable that I will never be able to hear again without feeling the ghost of that moment pass through me. I didn't reply. I didn't comment. Didn't DM her. Didn't call. Didn't type something out and then delete it. Didn't send a voice note. Didn't drive to her apartment. I just sat there, sandwich in hand, engine off, sun coming through the windshield at an angle that made everything look like a washed-out photograph. And somewhere in that silence, somewhere between the shock and the stillness, something shifted inside me that I didn't have words for yet. Something quiet, something permanent, something that wouldn't fully make sense until months later, when I watched the whole picture develop the way photographs used to, slowly, in a darkroom, image by image, detail by detail. But here's what I want you to understand before I tell you the rest. What happened next wasn't some dramatic revenge arc. It wasn't me hitting the gym and posting thirst traps. It wasn't some great reinvention montage set to a motivational song. It wasn't a comeback designed to make her regret anything. What happened was quieter than that. And somehow, because of that quietness, because I refused to perform any of it, it ended up being the loudest thing I never said. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 26 when we started dating. She was 24. We were together for 2 years and 3 months. Not a long time in the grand scheme of things, but long enough to rearrange your life around someone. Long enough to have your own instincts slowly replaced by theirs. Long enough to forget what your own preferences were before they got overwritten by someone else's. We met through mutual friends at a rooftop party in the city. The kind of party where the lights are warm and low and the music is loud enough that you have to lean in close to hear someone speak, which means every conversation already feels like a secret before you've said anything important. Her name was Celeste, and from the very first night, she was everything that felt like too much, in the most magnetic way possible. The first year was genuinely good. I want to be fair about that. I'm not going to retroactively paint the whole thing as a mistake or pretend I missed obvious red flags from day one, because that would be dishonest, and it would also miss the point. There were real moments. Good ones. Worth keeping even now. Celeste was charismatic in a way that made rooms tilt toward her when she walked in. Not the artificial kind of charisma that's all surface and no substance, at least not at first. She laughed with her entire body, the kind of laugh that made other people stop their own conversations to see what was funny. She had strong opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to defend them loudly in a room full of people who disagreed. She made friends in elevators. She turned strangers into audiences without even consciously trying. And for a while, watching that happen was genuinely one of my favorite things about her. And one-on-one, she was warm. That's the part people miss when they try to understand these stories. The people who end up hurting you most are almost never cold. They're warm. They're present. They make you feel chosen, genuinely chosen. And that's what makes the later distance so disorienting. Because you keep reaching for the warmth you know is real, even as it keeps moving away from you. She'd remember offhand things I mentioned and bring them back weeks later, unexpectedly, in the middle of conversations. She'd leave notes, actual handwritten notes, tucked into places I'd find them later, my jacket pocket or the book I'd been reading. She cooked breakfast on Sunday mornings with the kind of focused attention most people give to things that matter enormously. She asked good questions, and she actually listened to the answers, not just waiting for her turn to speak. I liked her. Deeply. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the kind of person who fills a room the way she did. I'm quieter, more deliberate. I work in structural engineering. I spend my days making sure things don't fall apart, making sure the load-bearing elements are right, checking my math, measuring before cutting. I don't make dramatic entrances. I don't announce myself. I show up when I say I will, do what I said I'd do, and go home. Celeste used to say she loved that about me. She called me her calm in the storm. Said it like it was the highest compliment she knew how to give. I should have paid more attention to what she actually meant by that, because I didn't understand until much later that what she was calling a compliment was really a description of my function, not my value, not who I was, just what I was useful for when everything else in her life got loud. I was the quiet corner, the exhale, the palate cleanser, and eventually, palate cleansers get boring. The first signs were small enough that I almost missed them entirely. About 8 months into the relationship, Celeste started posting more on social media. At first that seemed completely normal. People go through phases. Engagement ebbs and flows. She'd always been more active online than I was, and I'd never considered that a problem. But the content started shifting. It became more curated, more polished, more self-focused in a way that started to feel less like sharing and more like broadcasting. Posts about her journey, her growth era, her standards, her energy. Photos that took 45 minutes to stage but were captioned as candid. Quotes about self-worth. Captions that read like they'd been workshopped and reviewed and tested for maximum resonance. She'd still tag me in comments sometimes. Little inside jokes. Hearts. That felt normal. Then the tags got rarer. Then they stopped. Dinners we went to together. She posted the food, the ambience, the aesthetic of the table, the flickering candlelight and the wine glasses, and I was simply absent from the frame. Like I'd ordered delivery. A weekend trip we took upstate, hiking in the mornings and staying in a small cabin. One of the better weekends we'd had together. Every photograph was just her. The trail, the view from the ridge, her hand holding a coffee cup in the mist, her silhouette at golden hour against the tree line. I asked her about it once, gently, trying not to make it a thing. She said, I just like having my own content. My page, my aesthetic, you know? It's not a big deal. I said, okay. And I believed her. I genuinely believed her. I was already making excuses that she hadn't even asked me to make yet. Then came Fletcher. She started mentioning him around month 9. He was part of a content creator collective she'd recently joined, a loose group of people who posted travel videos and lifestyle content and urban exploration stuff. Fletcher ran a fairly successful travel channel. 90-something thousand subscribers on YouTube, more on Instagram. Drove a convertible. Looked like he'd been assembled specifically to look good in golden hour light, which, as far as I could tell, was when all his content was shot. At first his name came up in passing. Fletcher posted this restaurant downtown. Apparently the brunch there is incredible. Fletcher's doing a collab with this brand I've loved forever. Fine. Normal. Then more often. Then differently. Fletcher surprised his girlfriend at the airport. Flew her to Santorini for her birthday, like completely unannounced. She had no idea. Isn't that just? And she'd trail off with this particular kind of wistfulness that I recognized, but didn't want to name. I had taken Celeste to a cabin in the mountains for her birthday. We'd hiked to a waterfall, made dinner together, sat by the fire. She'd called it cozy and sweet, and seemed completely happy about it at the time. Now we were comparing it to Santorini. Now it was small. I noticed the shift. I noticed it clearly, and I let it pass because I told myself it wasn't about me. It was about her excitement about this new world she was building. I told myself I was being insecure. I told myself the right response was to give her space and trust the relationship. I gave her space. She used it to keep walking. I didn't know yet how far she planned to go. Around month 14, the argument started. Not the explosive kind that everyone talks about. Not the raised voices and slammed doors kind. These were worse. The grinding, low-level, persistent kind that don't really end. They just get paused. You bury one unresolved thing, and before the grave is even settled, there's another one stacking on top. You keep piling things on until one day the whole floor of your relationship is uneven and you can't remember where it was solid before, and you're both walking carefully, and neither of you says anything about it. She wanted more spontaneity. I planned things carefully because I respected both our time. She started calling it rigid. She wanted more social media presence, meaning she wanted me to appear in her content, to react to her posts, to be an active, visible part of her audience. I didn't really see the point of performing our relationship for people who didn't know us. She said my absence from her content looked weird. Said she felt like she had to explain why I wasn't there. She wanted someone who matched her energy. I asked her what that meant. She said I was overthinking it. I started adjusting myself. Downloaded Instagram again and actually used it this time. Started posting occasionally, things I thought would look like the kind of content her world valued. Started suggesting experiences I thought would work as stories rather than things I actually wanted to do. Proposed a last-minute trip to the coast. Something spontaneous, something that could be framed the right way, something that said fire instead of comfortable. She said yes. We went. I drove the entire 5-hour round trip. She sat in the passenger seat filming content for her feed, choosing songs based on how they'd sound in her stories, angling her phone against the window for the moving landscape shot, replying to comments from the last post while the miles passed outside. We got to the coast. I watched the ocean. She photographed it. We ate dinner at a place she'd pre-selected because the lighting was right for content. The trip went up on her page the next morning, and it looked absolutely perfect. The kind of perfect that makes strangers leave comments like, "I need this life," and "Ugh the vibe." My car appeared in 2 frames, blurred in the background. No tag. I didn't say a word about it. And I'm not presenting that silence as strength or patience or nobility. It was avoidance. I had become so committed to not being the heavy one, the difficult one, the one who made things complicated. I'd heard that word enough times by now. Heavy, said about me in enough different contexts, that I was swallowing things I should have been saying out loud. The floor kept cracking. I kept adding weight. Neither of us acknowledged that the whole thing was shifting. I didn't realize then that the shift was already irreversible. The night it ended wasn't a dramatic blowout. It was a Tuesday. We were at her apartment. She was on her phone, cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through something with the focused expression people get when the screen is doing more for them than the room they're sitting in. I was in the kitchen making pasta because we'd talked about making dinner together earlier, and she drifted back to her phone somewhere around the chopping garlic stage. I cooked the whole thing by myself. Set a bowl in front of her without making an issue of it. She said, "Thanks," without looking up. I sat across from her. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was the kind that both people are aware of, but neither knows how to break without it costing something. Then I said, very calmly, without drama, "Can we talk? Like actually talk. Not about plans or logistics or schedules. Just about us." She looked up from her phone, and what I saw in her expression in that moment was something I'd never seen from her before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defensiveness. It wasn't the sharp, charged look of someone ready for a fight. It was boredom. Quiet, resigned, almost tired boredom. Like she'd been waiting for this particular conversation the way you wait for a train you're not excited to take. Like the destination was known and unwanted, and there was nothing left to do but bored. She set her phone face down on the cushion beside her, looked at me, said, "I've been thinking. I feel like we want different things now." I said, "Okay, tell me what you want." She was quiet for a moment, choosing. Then, someone who keeps up with me. Someone exciting. Someone who doesn't make everything feel so. She paused. Chose the word. Heavy. That word. Heavy. I turned it over in my mind, feeling the weight of it, the particular precision of it. How long she must have been carrying it before she set it down in front of me. "I'm heavy," I said. Not a question. Not an argument. Just repeating it back to make sure I'd heard correctly. "That's not. I don't mean it like that," she said. But she didn't correct it either. I nodded slowly. "And you've been thinking this for a while?" "Yes," she said. I appreciated the honesty. For about half a second. Then I thought about the timeline. The photographs I wasn't in. The comments about Santorini. The name that kept coming up. The 48 hours that would turn out to matter. "All right," I said. She blinked. Sat up slightly. "That's it. What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something. You're not even going to." "Going to what?" She looked at her hands. Then quietly, "Fight for it." I looked at her for a long time. I thought about fighting. About what that would look like. What it would cost. About every adjustment I'd already made. Every trail I'd stopped hiking. Every weekend I'd filled with her schedule. Everything I'd swallowed. Every way I'd bent myself trying to be less of what I was. Trying to be faster and flashier and more visible. About the fact that none of it, not a single thing I'd changed, had moved us any closer together. I said, "I don't think that's what you actually want right now." She didn't deny it. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I said, "Take care of yourself, Celeste." And I left. The door closed behind me with a soft, completely undramatic click. I stood in the hallway for a moment, jacket in hand, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not grief, not devastation, not the sharp, breathless crash of heartbreak. Something quieter than all of those. The feeling of setting down a bag you've been carrying for so long you'd stopped noticing the weight. I thought that was the end of it. I honestly believed we would exit each other's lives with the quiet dignity that the situation deserved. Two people who tried, who didn't quite fit in the end, who went their separate ways without spectacle. I was wrong. 48 hours later, the post went up. Sometimes you outgrow people, and that's okay. Cherry Blossom, know your worth, Queens. Never settle for comfort when you deserve fire. Crown Sparkles, walking away from anything that dims your light and entering my next chapter unbothered and elevated. Growth looks different for everyone, and I'm choosing myself. Hashtag self-worth, hashtag know your worth, hashtag never settle, hashtag glow up, hashtag level up, hashtag new chapter. 312 likes in the first 2 hours. Comments flooding in from every direction. Period, sis. She understood the assignment. You deserve the entire world. This energy, OMG. Queen behavior. Okay, we're thriving. Wait, are you okay? And her reply to that last one, that specific little reply. Better than ever, honestly, yellow heart. And then a comment from @Fleech.adventures. Fletcher, you've always been too good for ordinary. See. On to bigger things, airplane. Her reply beneath that. You already know, relieved faced. 214 people liked her reply to him alone. I read every single word of it. Standing in the parking lot of a grocery store in a light evening drizzle. I'd stopped to buy eggs on my way home from work. The kind of ordinary errand that has no business being the backdrop for one of the more clarifying moments of your adult life. She had taken the quiet end of a 2-year relationship and turned it into content. She had turned "we want different things" into a personal brand moment with hashtags and fire emojis and a public audience of hundreds. She had packaged the exit as a coronation. And Fletcher, with his convertible and his golden hour aesthetic and his Santorini surprises, was right there in the comments, ready to co-sign the narrative he'd apparently been building a stake in for longer than I'd understood. I stood in the rain for a moment. Then I put my phone in my pocket, bought my eggs, drove home, and made a decision, quietly, without telling anyone, without announcing it, without making it into a caption of my own. I was going to disappear, not in a dark way, not out of despair or bitterness, out of clarity. Here's the part of the story I need to be honest about, because without it, nothing that happened afterward makes any real sense. By the end of those 2 years, I had become a version of myself I barely recognized. Not because Celeste had done something dramatic to me, not because she'd been cruel or dishonest in obvious ways, but because love, real love, makes you accommodating in ways you don't always notice happening. And when that accommodation gets rewarded with comparisons and heaviness, comments, and a shrinking space in someone else's frame, you start accommodating more. You start trying harder. You reshape again. And again, I had stopped hiking because our weekends were always scheduled around her content calendar. I had abandoned a woodworking project I'd been genuinely excited about because the apartment wasn't practical for it, and also because sawdust wasn't aesthetic. I had cut back on weekend calls with my younger brother because there was always something Celeste and I had going on. I had started checking her posts before going to sleep and waking up already aware of her comment section before I was fully conscious. I had started measuring my own worth against the benchmarks she kept casually raising. The Santorinis, the airport surprises, the public declarations of fire and elevation. I had, without deliberate intention, turned myself into a supporting character in someone else's story. And the morning after she posted, I stood in my bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and asked a completely simple question. When was the last time I did something just because I actually wanted to? I stood there for a while. I couldn't answer it. That scared me more than the breakup did. So I stopped. I deleted Instagram, deactivated Twitter, went offline in a way that felt less like withdrawal and more like surfacing after being underwater for much longer than I'd realized. I called my parents for the first time in months, talked to my dad for an hour about completely ordinary things, his garden, a neighbor's renovation project, a documentary he'd been watching. Felt the tension in my shoulders release somewhere it hadn't been in a long time. I went back to the hiking trails I used to go to before Celeste. The ones with the long, steep sections that make your legs ache in a way that feels like honest payment for something. I pulled the woodworking project out of the storage closet. A small cabinet I'd been building from cherry wood, halfway finished, joints cut, but not assembled, sitting in the dark getting dusty. I spent a Saturday in the backyard putting it together. Got sawdust on my clothes. Didn't care. I started cooking the way I used to, not performance cooking, not recipes chosen because they'd look good on a plate. Just the simple things I'd always liked. A slow soup from scratch, fresh bread, rice dishes that require actual patience. I called my brother on a Saturday. He picked up and said, "Whoa, are you actually alive?" I laughed. "Think so." starting to feel more like it. What happened? Nothing dramatic, I said. I'm just figuring out what I actually like again. He was quiet for a second. That sounds ominous. It's honestly kind of great, I said, and I meant it completely. 3 weeks out, I ran into Tobias at a coffee shop near the office. Tobias was one of those mutual friends who'd known both of us from before, decent enough to not take sides, honest enough to not pretend things were different from what they were. He looked uncomfortable when he spotted me, visibly carrying something. I waved him over. He sat down with the careful posture of someone holding news they're not sure they should deliver. I said, "You can just say it." He exhaled like I'd given him permission to put down something heavy. "She and Fletcher made it official. They posted this morning." I nodded. "You okay?" he asked, studying my face carefully. "Yeah," I said. He kept studying, looking for the performance, looking for the cracks in the composure. He didn't find any. "She moved fast," he said. "Testing." I said she always did. He sat with that for a second, then gave a short, genuine laugh, surprised, like he hadn't expected something both true and fair to come out of my mouth in the same breath. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, after a pause, "I always thought she had something genuinely good with you, and I don't think she understood what she was doing with it." I took that in, didn't wave it away, didn't cling to it either. We ordered coffee and talked for an hour about things entirely unrelated to Celeste, the bridge project I'd just been assigned, a film we'd both recently seen, his apartment situation. The conversation breathed the way conversations are supposed to breathe when nobody's performing. It was the most relaxed I'd felt in months. But something had caught in the back of my mind. The timeline. 48 hours from our breakup to a post about entering her next chapter. 3 weeks in, and they were official. Official enough to post. Official enough that it was known inside their whole social circle. I did the math on the walk back to my car. 2 plus 2 in that particular equation didn't add up to coincidence. I filed it away, kept walking. 2 months passed. Then 3. I was promoted at work. It wasn't something I'd chased as a response to anything. It wasn't a look what I became moment engineered to prove a point. It happened because I'd been putting my head down and working well, and the work had accumulated in the way that good work does when you stop performing it and just do it. Lead engineer on a bridge restoration project in a city 2 hours north. A real project, meaningful scope, a team I'd be managing for the first time, better pay by enough to matter, a travel stipend. I said yes before I'd even finished reading the offer. I also found a new apartment. I'd been in my old place for 3 years, and it had slowly, without my noticing, become saturated with the presence of someone who wasn't there anymore. Not in a dramatic ghost story way, just in the quiet way that spaces absorb the habits of the people who spent time in them. Second floor, corner unit. East-facing windows that let morning light in at an angle that hit the floor and made everything feel early and possible. Hardwood. A kitchen that was actually functional. I bought a real couch, not a placeholder, not the secondhand thing that was always going to be temporary, but an actual couch that I actually chose. I hung things on the walls I actually liked, not things that looked good in photographs, things I actually wanted to look at. It sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. Month 4. Wednesday evening. My phone buzzed while I was in the kitchen. A number I deleted but still recognized, the way you recognize a face before you consciously remember the name. "Hey, I know this is probably weird to hear from me. I just wanted to see how you're doing." I read it standing by the stove with something heating. I typed, "I'm good. Hope you are too." A minute passed. "I heard about your promotion. That's really great. Thanks." Longer pause. Then, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Did you actually care about us?" Like, genuinely. I read that 3 times. She wasn't asking whether I'd loved her. That wasn't the real question. She was asking something stranger and harder, whether any of it had been real from my side, or whether she'd imagined it. I typed, "I'm not sure what answer you're looking for." "An honest one," she said. So I gave her one. "Yes, completely. That's why when you turned the ending into a public post, I didn't argue about it. Some things don't belong to an audience." 11 minutes of silence. Then, I think I messed up. I put my phone face down on the counter. Not a power move. Not cruelty. Just the simple recognition that some admissions arrive after their window of usefulness has already closed. Not every acknowledgement requires a response. Some things you receive, hold for a moment, and release. I went back to what I was cooking. Month 5. Tobias called me. An actual call, not a text, which always means something. He told me what he'd heard from inside their social circle. Fletcher, the travel creator, the man who'd posted, You've always been too good for ordinary. Under Celeste's breakup caption, the man with the convertible and the golden hour lighting and the airport to Santorini surprises had been, it turned out, spectacularly ordinary in the worst possible way. He'd been seeing multiple women simultaneously. Not a casual overlap. A calculated, sustained, deliberately managed arrangement that he'd apparently maintained for years. One of the women found the others. And the thread that went up was thorough. Screenshots, date logs, voice messages, the kind of receipts that leave no room for interpretation. Fletcher's following dropped significantly within days. Brand partnerships pulled out. The travel channel went quiet. The convertible disappeared from his content. And Celeste had posted publicly about choosing fire over comfort. She'd gotten fire. It just burned in the direction she hadn't planned for. I want to be careful about what I say here. I'm aware of how easy it would be to let this feel like justice delivered, like the universe wrapping up the narrative with a satisfying bow. And I won't pretend there wasn't a moment, a single, quiet, private moment, where something settled in my chest that felt like confirmation. But I didn't celebrate it. Whatever pain she felt from that situation, and it would have been real pain, genuine humiliation, the specific sting of being publicly adjacent to someone else's public unraveling, I wouldn't have chosen that for her. Not because I was noble about it, just because that's not who I am. I thought about something an older engineer on my crew had said, standing on the third span of the bridge one early morning, looking out at the water below. He'd said, "Everyone wants to talk about what's visible. The cables, the pylons, the surface. But the whole thing is held up by what's underneath. The foundation nobody photographs. Pull that out, and the most beautiful structure folds like paper." He'd walked away before I could respond. But I thought about it for a long time. About foundations. About what holds things up when nobody's watching. About how Celeste had spent 2 years pointing at the surface of our relationship and calling it insufficient, when the thing she'd actually been dismantling was the foundation. And foundations, once deliberately removed, don't restore themselves just because you've realized they were holding something up. Month 6. She called me. Not a text, an actual call. I let it ring to voicemail. She left one. She said she knew I didn't know her anything. Said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. Said she'd treated me unfairly. And she didn't just mean at the end. She meant throughout. That she'd compared me to people who weren't worth the comparison. That she'd made me feel like being steady was a problem. Like being quiet was a problem. Like showing up consistently without announcing it was somehow less than showing up loudly for an audience. She said she thought what she'd actually wanted was someone to perform a relationship with. And I had been trying to actually have one. And she hadn't been able to see the difference until she was deep inside something that was entirely performance and entirely empty. She said she wasn't asking for anything. She just needed me to know that she saw it now. The voicemail ended. I listened to it once. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger. Not as a power move. Out of simplicity. Her understanding of her own mistake was real, and it was hers to keep. It didn't require my participation to mean something. And I had, by that point, already made my peace with the whole thing. Not by convincing myself she was wrong about everything, but by accepting what had happened and deciding to keep moving forward. Some admissions come after the moment when they can change anything. You hear them, you acknowledge them, then you release them and keep going. Month 6.5. I'm going to be precise here because it matters to the sequence. Something happened that I haven't mentioned yet, and it reframed the entire story in a way I wasn't expecting. I was going through old photos on my phone, not out of nostalgia, just clearing storage, and I came across a series from about month 10 of the relationship. A birthday dinner I'd organized for Celeste at a restaurant she'd mentioned once in passing, weeks before, while talking about something completely unrelated. I'd remembered, made a reservation, arranged for the kitchen to bring out a small cake. None of it was grand or expensive or designed to be seen from the outside. It was just paying attention. In the photos, she was genuinely happy. Not posed happy. Actually happy. The kind of expression that doesn't know a camera is on it. I remembered that dinner clearly now, how she'd said at the end of the night, squeezing my hand on the walk back to the car, "How did you even remember I mentioned that place?" I barely remember mentioning it. I'd said, "I listen." She'd laughed and leaned into me. And then I thought about what had happened in the months after that dinner. Fletcher, the comparisons, the Santorini conversation, the way she'd started measuring what we had against what other people displayed. I looked at that photo for a while, and I understood something I hadn't fully articulated before. She had been genuinely happy with what we had, until she wasn't. Not because what we had changed, but because what she was comparing it to changed. Because her reference point shifted from her own life to other people's highlights. Because the algorithm had started feeding her a steady diet of what love looked like when it was being performed for an audience. And eventually, the real thing started looking small against the performance. She didn't fall out of love with me. She fell in love with a version of love that I was never going to be able to give her because it didn't actually exist. It was constructed. It was curated. It was a series of highlight moments stripped of everything ordinary that holds ordinary life together. I'm not saying that to excuse what happened. I'm saying it because it changes how I understand her. She wasn't looking for better. She was looking for something that looked better from the outside. And that's a completely different kind of lost. Month 7. I went on a first date. Her name was Audrey. Landscape architect. Thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that surprised me the first time it landed. The kind that comes from someone who's observed a lot and speaks carefully when they finally do. She hated small talk with a specificity that made me like her immediately. She loved films from the 60s and 70s and had actual opinions about them that didn't come from lists. She asked me about the bridge project on our first date and spent 20 minutes asking genuine follow-up questions, the kind that require real listening, not just polite nodding. We talked for 4 hours. It felt like 40 minutes. I want to be careful about how I write this part because Audrey deserves better than being a plot device in a story about someone else. She is not a prize I won. She is not a point I proved. She is a person, but I will say this. For those entire 4 hours, I was not adjusting anything about myself. I was not running background calculations about how I was being perceived or what the scene looked like from outside it or whether my answers were interesting enough or whether I was matching the right energy. I was just there, present, actual. And the startling thing, the thing that genuinely caught me off guard, was how natural it felt. How light. How entirely unlike the constant low-grade performance anxiety I hadn't even named while I was living inside it. I had spent 2 years in a relationship where I was always slightly monitoring myself. And sitting across from Audrey in that restaurant, talking about bridges and old films and the things we both quietly cared about, I realized what it felt like to exist in a conversation without monitoring anything. It changed my baseline, in the best possible way. Month 8. Celeste posted something different. A quieter kind of post. I didn't see it myself. A friend sent me a screenshot with a message that just said, "Thought you should see this." It was a simple photo. Her by a window, looking out at something outside the frame. Soft light. No heavy editing. The caption said only, "Learning that the loudest choices aren't always the wisest ones." Quieter chapter ahead. No hashtags. No crown emoji. No fire emoji. No, know your worth. The comments were confused. Her usual audience didn't know what to do with this version of her. Half asked if she was okay. Some tried the standard affirmations, and they landed awkwardly, like the wrong key in a lock. A few people said they loved it, that this was different. She'd replied briefly to a handful, "Getting there. Just figuring some things out. Thanks for the grace." I looked at it for a moment, set my phone down on the windowsill, and watched the last of the evening light leave the sky, which was doing what it always does, moving on, indifferent and beautiful. Month 9 was also when I had a conversation I keep coming back to. One of the senior guys on my crew, a man who'd been doing structural work for 30+ years, the kind of person who carries whole libraries of practical knowledge without ever making a performance of it, found me on the third span one early morning during an inspection. The mist was still sitting on the water below. The city was just starting to wake up, distant and muted. He stood beside me without saying anything for a while. Then, "You know what's funny about bridges?" I said, "What?" He said, "Everyone talks about the visible parts. The cables, the towers, the surface. People take photographs of those parts. Name them, write about them. But the whole thing is held up by what's underneath. The foundation nobody photographs. Nobody posts pictures of a foundation. Pull that out, and the most beautiful bridge in the world folds like paper in an hour." He walked away. Didn't wait for a response. Didn't need one. I stood there in the mist for a long time after that, thinking about foundations, about what actually holds things up, about how Celeste had spent 2 years pointing at the visible parts of our relationship, the experiences, the aesthetics, the things that could be posted and captioned, and calling them insufficient, not understanding or not caring that those visible things were resting on something she'd never pointed a camera at, something she'd only noticed when it was gone. The bridge held because of what nobody saw. And so apparently had I. I want to be honest about the healing timeline too, because I think people have a tendency to describe recovery as either immediate or dramatic, and it was neither. There were nights in the first 2 months where I sat in that apartment and missed her. Not the relationship. I was clear-eyed enough about what the relationship had become, but I missed certain specific things. The warmth of her when she was genuinely there. The way she'd fall asleep mid-sentence sometimes, just gone all at once, like a light switching off. The Sunday breakfasts. The way a room felt when she was happy in it. Grief is specific. It attaches to particular things, not to abstract totals. And I let myself feel those specific things without performing the not feeling them. I didn't post about healing. Didn't caption my progress. Didn't share quotes about glow-ups or moving on or any of the vocabulary I associated with turning your pain into content. I just felt it quietly, and then I felt it less quietly, and then one day I realized I hadn't thought about it at all in a week. That's not a triumph. It's not a defeat either. It's just what actually happens when you let time work without turning it into a performance. The feelings finish themselves on their own schedule. I got out of the way and let them. There's one more thing I want to say to anyone who recognizes themselves in the narrator's seat here. The comfortable one. The too steady one. The one who got quietly compared to someone louder and flashier until comfortable started to sound like an insult. The one who bent and adjusted and accommodated and still ended up watching someone walk away toward fire while calling you dim. I want to say this without sentimentality. Your steadiness was not the problem. Your consistency was not a consolation prize. The capacity to build something real, to love without broadcasting it, to show up for the uncaptioned parts of someone's life, that is not ordinary. It is, genuinely, the rarest thing. The world Celeste was living in had confused the performance of exceptional for the thing itself, had confused a Santorini surprise trip for depth, had confused fire emojis for heat that lasts. Those things look bright, but they're not foundations. And foundations, the slow, steady, invisible, nobody photographs them kind, are the only things that actually hold. She eventually figured that out. It cost her something real to figure it out. I hope the lesson stayed. That's the whole story. There is no dramatic final confrontation where I say everything perfectly and she breaks down and the music swells. There's just a parking lot. Eggs. A muted drive home. A quiet decision. A long process of becoming myself again that I didn't perform for anyone. There's a bridge that came in ahead of schedule. There's a couch I actually chose. There's a Sunday morning with east-facing light and someone asleep and nothing to caption. There's a like button on a LinkedIn comment and a closed app and the ordinary, foundational, completely unspectacular act of keeping going. She posted "Know Your Worth" with a crown emoji and 300 likes. I took it in a parking lot in the rain, bought my eggs, and drove home. She meant it as a public declaration of elevation. It turned out to be the most useful thing she ever gave me, just not in the way she planned. The bridge project wrapped up around month 9. We came in ahead of schedule, which in structural engineering is the kind of thing people talk about for years afterward, quietly and with reverence, because it almost never happens. The city issued a formal letter of commendation to our firm. My name was in it. I called my dad that evening from the hotel room. He picked up on the second ring. I told him. There was a pause on his end, and then he said something I've thought about many times since. "I knew you'd get here," he said. "You always did things your way. Slow and right. Slow and right." I sat with that on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time after we said goodbye. I thought about all the months I'd spent trying to be fast instead, to be visible instead, to make my presence loud enough to be worth noticing in someone else's frame. How much energy that had consumed, how little it had produced, how different everything looked now that I'd stopped. Slow and right wasn't a limitation. It was a method, and it had been working the whole time. The last time I heard from Celeste was around month 10. Not a call, not a text. I'd posted a professional update on LinkedIn, a photograph of the completed bridge, the finished span catching afternoon light over the water, a short paragraph about the team and the scope of the work and what it had meant to be part of it. In the comments, her name appeared. She wrote, "This is incredible. Congratulations. You were always building things quietly. I just didn't appreciate it." I read it once. I clicked the like button. I closed the app. And that was it. That was the end of whatever thread had still been running between us. No dramatic final exchange. No confrontation. No tearful phone call. No moment where I delivered some perfectly crafted piece of wisdom that made her understand everything she'd lost. Just a like button, and a closed app, and a life that kept moving forward. There's something I want to say directly before I close this out. I've been careful throughout this story not to frame Celeste as a villain, because that would be both dishonest and beside the point. She wasn't malicious. She wasn't deliberately cruel. She was a person who got sold a very specific idea of what a relationship should produce, in terms of aesthetics, in terms of social proof, in terms of audience validation, and started measuring everything against that idea, including me. A lot of people are living that same confusion right now. The algorithm has become a measuring stick most of us didn't agree to be measured by. The people who perform their lives the loudest get the most response, and that response starts to look like confirmation that they're living correctly. That fire is better than warmth. That loud is better than steady. That someone who makes every moment look good from the outside is worth more than someone who makes you feel safe on the inside. Celeste didn't invent that confusion. She just let it in. And I spent 2 years inside a relationship that was slowly being reoriented toward an audience rather than toward each other. I adjusted. I bent. I swallowed things I should have said. I changed things I shouldn't have changed. I quietly lost track of myself in the effort to be something more interesting to someone who was already looking elsewhere. And when it ended publicly with a caption and a hashtag and a crown, I had a choice. I could perform my response, post my own recovery, build my own counter-narrative, become the kind of person who would have gotten more than 312 likes. Or I could just stop performing entirely and go find the person I'd been before the reshaping started. That person was doing fine. Turned out, he always had been. There was a moment, about a month after her LinkedIn comment, that I want to end with. It was a Sunday morning. Early, maybe 6:30. I was at the kitchen table in my apartment with coffee and a book I'd been reading slowly for 3 weeks because I was actually enjoying it instead of racing through it. That east-facing light was coming through the windows at its low, early angle, gold and unhurried, turning a 20-minute strip of the floor luminous before shifting away. Audrey was in the living room. She'd fallen asleep on the couch the night before with a book face down on her chest, and she was still there, breathing quietly under the blanket I'd tucked over her at some point in the dark. I sat at that table, with my coffee, in the gold light, looking at that completely unperformed, completely uncaptured, entirely ordinary Sunday morning scene. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not a peak emotion, not the kind of happiness people describe as a high, more like groundedness. Like having both feet on solid floor and knowing with certainty that it will hold. I thought about a comment section, about fire emojis, about a crown, about know your worth, queens, never settle for less. And I thought, she was right. Not in the direction she intended it, but right. I had been worth more than what we were. The quiet, the steadiness, the showing up without announcing it, the building of things that hold. None of that had ever been a problem. It had been the only real thing in the whole 2 years. And it had kept being the real thing after she left. That sandwich, sitting in my car, half-eaten, sun in the windshield. I never finished it. I set it down, drove back, opened my blueprints, kept working. She posted, know your worth, like a declaration of independence. I took it like a blueprint. She meant it as a goodbye. I built something with it. We both ended up exactly right, just not together, and standing on solid ground, in morning light, with something real. I wouldn't change a thing about how the quiet ended.